Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Thursday, March 14th, 2024. Professor Jeffrey Sachs joins us now. Professor Sachs and I were together as part of an academic team interacting intellectually on the natural law principles taught by St. Thomas Aquinas for 2.5 days in the Vatican last week. Jeff, it was a pleasure to spend time with you and Sonia and all of our other friends, but I'm happy we're back home.
Yeah, that was fun. And 750th anniversary of the death of Thomas Aquinas. It was quite an occasion.
Yes, and I thank you for causing me to be invited. The viewers should know that wherever you go internationally, even amongst Roman Catholic cardinals, Professor Sachs is known and recognized. I won't go into the details, but it blew me away in a happy way that I am your friend. Let's start with the breaking news this morning in your end of the world, which is that President Trump in 2017, not even a year in office, authorized and ordered the CIA to try and destabilize Chinese leadership by offensive cyber operations. This from the same man who was victimized by cyber operations aimed at him, allegedly by the Russians. First of all, do you believe this? And secondly, what did they try to do? And third, where is the authority for this? And fourth, how bad is it?
Well, yes, of course, I believe it because it is a principal job of the CIA to stir up trouble. It's unbelievable. What a disaster to have an extraordinarily powerful agency, maybe the most powerful agency in the U.S. government, operating secretly to stir up trouble all over the world. That's the MO of the CIA. And when you travel around the world, as I do, you hear a lot about this. Nothing in today's revelation that President Trump ordered the CIA to stir up trouble and unrest using propaganda to supposedly undermine China is a surprise. Of course, it is just another huge disappointment in the childishness of our government. It's almost infantile, the way we behave. But what we do is we estimate around 60 or 70 billion dollars a year for this secretive organization to cause trillions of dollars of headaches for us. Wars, unrest, distrust, breakdown of relations. Now, one of the things that the story says today is that the CIA spread malicious disinformation about Chinese initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative. The Belt and Road Initiative is an initiative of China to help finance and build rail, 5G, electrification in the countries that are neighboring to China, for example, in Southeast Asia, or that are along the Indian Ocean, or even other parts of the world. It's a meritorious idea, connect the world with modern 21st century infrastructure.
Right.
But the message from the U.S. has been, it's terrible. It's a secret effort of China to control these countries, take over the world. Well, what today's story says is, yes, the CIA engaged in propaganda against this. So for me, it's interesting. I know these projects. I see them on the ground. I understand what they mean for economic development. That's my job.
Right.
And I know that the bad-mouthing is totally phony. But here you see, I'm happy to see today, it was an order of the CIA to deliberately badmouth these projects. But it is extremely disheartening. And if you follow this day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year, as I have for decades now, well, the CIA destabilized Ukraine. The CIA destabilized Syria. The CIA aimed to destabilize China. What are we doing? It's supposed to be an quote, an intelligence agency,
I think
not
you
a
gave
world destabilization agency.
you gave a great analysis, not just for me. You've been saying this for many years, that there are really two CIAs. There's the intelligence gathering entity, which Harry Truman believed he was establishing. And then there's this secret operational private army of the presidents, which run amok and cause coups and cause catastrophes that Truman never imagined he was creating, and lived profoundly and publicly to regret.
You know, in the 1947 National Security Act, as we've discussed, both of these functions were put in there, though the quote, operational, secret, covert destabilization function was only put in there in very vague terms. But Atchison, Secretary of State, Foreign Policy, senior official of Truman, and the president knew. They were worried from the start. As you pointed out when we last talked about this, Truman wrote about this in the 1960s. What did I do? I knew this was trouble. But the reason that the CIA is so damaging is that what it does is secret and completely unaccountable. There has been one and only one systematic review of the CIA. That was 50 years ago, the so-called Church Committee, led by Frank Church. And he had to fight every bit of the way to get any honesty out of the CIA. But what he uncovered back in 1975 was completely shocking and scandalous at the time. The assassinations, the coups, the regime change operations, the pervasive propaganda, the spying on American citizens, which is no doubt continuing until today. And since 1975, there has not been a systematic review ever. And I know, because we see it, we hear stories like this, it's one harebrained scheme after another. For example, President Obama signs a secret order called Operation Timber Sycamore for the CIA to overthrow Bashar al-Assad. That is a dozen years ago. We created chaos in Syria and in the greater Middle East. Does anyone know about it? Well, the New York Times wrote about it once in 2015, once in 2016, short stories. That's the end of it. We don't talk about this. You get incredible falsehoods that, Syria, well, that's where Putin intervened. Yeah, he intervened in 2015 at the invitation of the Syrian government, which was under the threat of being overthrown by the CIA. I knew about this in different ways because in top diplomatic circles, and I mean top diplomatic circles, it was known that peace could have come to Syria a dozen years ago, but the United States blocked it. And that's not a rumor. That's not something I read in a book. That's something I know directly.
I want to segue into how acute the tensions are between China, the U.S., and Russia. But before we do, because this is so fascinating and you have so much firsthand knowledge, now I'm going to ask you to reach into history. I think I know the answer to this, and it's not a happy one. Has any president in the post-World War II era resisted the temptation to either unleash the CIA or use it as a private army?
Well, you know, the most famous
JFK?
case, I was going to say, and it may be the most pivotal moment of modern American history. We don't know till this moment. But after the Bay of Pigs failure, that was the CIA-inspired idea, the CIA-provoked idea of invading Cuba in the spring of 1961, in the first months of the Kennedy administration, planned during the Eisenhower administration, laid on the desk of this new young president who said, this doesn't feel right, but he went along with it. It was a complete debacle. Kennedy said, what is the matter with these people? And he is said to have said, I want to rip the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it. And he and the CIA became foes. And it is alleged, and I think there are reasonable grounds to believe that CIA operatives, whether official, unofficial, rogue, disgruntled, or whatever, participated in the assassination in November 1963. Like everything else, the CIA dossier on the Kennedy assassination remains partly secret under orders of every president since 1963, mind you, until today, including Biden, who has kept documents secret for more than 60 years.
All right. Again, I don't want to get off, but I have to respond to that. And I think you may know this. You may have heard me say it before. In my last conversation with President Trump in the White House, he called me a lot. And this is after January 6th. So it's 2 weeks before, or a week before he's leaving office. He wanted to run past me the names of people he was going to pardon and sentences he was going to commute. He wanted my opinion on them. Some of them I knew. I said, how you doing? He said, not too well. And he went off into a tangent about what he thought happened with the election. I said, you made a promise to the public many times and to me privately that you haven't kept. What? I'll take care of it right now. I said, you promised you would release the records of the JFK assassination. He said to me, Judge, if they showed you what they showed me, you wouldn't have released it either. And I said, who's they and what did they show you? And then he said, Judge, someday when we're on the phone, and then he raised his voice, and there aren't 15 people listening to the phone call, back to a normal voice, I'll tell you.
Oh, my God.
I mean, this makes it sound even worse. Who are they? Probably somebody in the intelligence community. What did they show him? JFK's brains blown out?
This is it. It was said by one person that after the Kennedy assassination, there has been no president. They have only been factotums of the system since then.
Yeah.
It may well be the most decisive event in modern American history.
Right.
And to this day, there are things that obviously are being kept from the public.
Right. We're going to take a break to pay some bills, just about a minute. When we come back, I'm going to ask Professor Sachs how acute, how tense, how dangerous are the relations between China, Russia, and the United States today. But first, this. How do you really feel about your financial future right now, today? Stable or uncertain? Despite all the happy talk that the Fed and the banks want you to buy into, I believe that 2024 is going to be a very unstable year, politically and financially. That's one of the reasons I decided to buy physical gold and silver, and I suggest you should do the same and do it now. Why? Because throughout times of economic uncertainty, gold and silver have rightly earned a reputation for stability. Owning precious metals has made me feel more stable, and it can do the same for you. Reach out to my friends at Lear Capital and get their free wealth protection guides. You can reach them at 800-511-4620. Lear has earned an excellent reputation by helping thousands of customers just like you move portions of their retirement savings into Lear gold and silver IRAs. It's easy to do, and it's tax and penalty free. Don't be caught off guard. Experts predict the markets may tank again. You'll be happy if you have protection in place. So call Lear at 800-511-4620. 800-511-4620, or go to LearJudgeNap.com and tell them your friend the judge sent you. Professor Sachs, how acute are the tensions today among Russia, the United States, and China, in large measure because of the type of American shenanigans and misjudgments that you've been so articulately critical of?
The tensions are extraordinarily high, getting higher, and we have daily talk of World War III. nuclear war and the like. And we should not take this for banter or normal. What we have is an absolutely alarming situation where the US foreign policy and the CIA operations are to undermine two nuclear superpowers, Russia and China. The story that we've been discussing about Trump ordering the CIA to undermine China is not news to the Chinese. So how can they view the US with equanimity? Certainly, President Putin and the Russian leadership understand everything about the US trying to undermine Russia, whether it is through the NATO enlargement, the coups that the US has instigated in countries around Russia, such as most disastrously in Ukraine in February 2014, or the open war. But then to add to this, we don't know whether the US president is capable or in charge, because obviously he is debilitated in some way, and we don't know how much. But this doesn't seem to be a president capable in any way of negotiating at a high level. There are no discussions at a high level taking place between the US and Russia. We don't have discussions between Biden and Putin. And so we have an absentee White House right now. And then we have craziness coming out of Europe. We have President Macron, who I know personally for many, many years, saying absolutely outlandish things about we're going to send our troops to Ukraine. We need to get involved. There are no red lines and so forth. I know the French leadership. I know the European leadership. Nobody understands, even on the inside, what is Macron doing right now. But it's completely reckless. If we had an active president, believe me, this would not happen, except if we had the most irresponsible kind of president. But Biden obviously has no control over this.
President Macron, in the past 2 weeks, and you and I talked about this when we were together last week in Rome, 3 times seemed to be musing aloud about French troops on the ground. The Russian released taped conversation of the German generals plotting to send Taurus missiles behind the back of Chancellor Scholz, who went on national television to put a stop to all of this, to his credit, seemed to indicate that the German generals knew that the French troops are already on the ground.
Yes, of course they're on the ground. Poland's foreign minister confirmed, as if we didn't know, that NATO forces are on the ground in Ukraine. We're with a series of tripwires that are so dangerous, and there are no apparent grown-ups anywhere to be found. And we don't know who runs anything in the United States right now, because when President Biden says, well, we're not going to send troops, and then he gets the country wrong or whatever it is, then it's corrected by the White House. We don't know actually whether anybody is running anything right now. And I believe the CIA remains extraordinarily powerful and dangerous in this. It's interesting that in this month's issue of Foreign Affairs, which is kind of the public guide to the insider Washington thinking, there's an article by the CIA director, Bill Burns, about how dangerous and provocative Russia is. But when that same person, Bill Burns, was the U.S. ambassador to Russia in 2008, it was Burns who sent a memo back to Washington that said NATO enlargement to Ukraine is absolutely reckless and provocative, and Russia is telling us it could well lead to a civil war. Do you think that Burns cites his own memo even?
Of course not.
not. And how do we know about that memo? Because of WikiLeaks, not because the United States government ever tells us the truth about anything. And
if I remember correctly, there's a famous line in there. Yet, which is no in Russian. Yet means niet. He actually put that in the memo.
And what he was saying by saying yet means niet, it's the entire Russian political class. They don't want NATO on their border for completely understandable reasons. But does Burns reflect honestly as if he's writing for adults? No, because they don't feel that they have to talk to adults at all. They don't have to tell the truth. They propagandize, they destabilize, they lie, they cheat, they steal. That's what Pompeo explained to a group of students about what he found when he was running the CIA. We lie, we cheat, we steal. Well,
we get away with it.
And there's no accountability. And now a president that is not, I would guess, capable of holding anybody to account at this point.
All right, just segueing a little bit. I don't know if we knew about this last week or talked about it or not, but what's your take on Victoria Nuland's departure? I know you're overjoyed, but do you think she jumped or was pushed?
I'm not thrilled with her arrival on my campus.
Oh, that's right. She's wait a minute. She's a fellow Columbia faculty member with Jeffrey Sachs.
There you go. We're not in the same department, but oh my God, I think she was pushed. Basically, she was the point person on Ukraine. This has been obviously one of the great debacles of modern American history, the Ukraine project. It isn't something from 2022. It's not a response to Putin. It's an American project. It's a project, by the way, that dates to the immediate period after World War II, not even to the end of the Cold War, to infiltrate Ukraine, to get alliances with what were then Nazi sympathizers, right-wing forces, and so forth. When Ukraine became independent in 1991 with the dissolution of the Soviet Union, then the CIA continued its project that this will be our base of operation for weakening Russia. This then became part of the extend NATO to Ukraine idea and the destabilization of Ukraine through normal CIA practices, including a violent coup in February 2014. Now, Nuland was a key part of this whole process because she was a deputy security advisor to Cheney, under George W. Bush Jr. Then she became the ambassador to NATO under George W. Bush Jr., exactly at the time of pushing NATO enlargement. And then she shows up the next moment as Obama comes in as Hillary Clinton's spokesperson. Then she becomes the Assistant Secretary of State, flying back and forth and plotting the post-Yanukovych government. Then she shows up, she misses a step during the Trump period, and then she's hired by Biden to pick up where she left off. And so she's been the point person on Ukraine, basically from at least the 2008 NATO expansion. Well, what has it gotten us? It's gotten us a massive war, a massive loss of territory of Ukraine, hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians dead, failure on the battlefield, of course, not surprisingly, failure of the sanctions regime, not surprisingly. It's been a complete debacle. So when the Deputy Secretary of State position opened, she was Undersecretary of State and went for the promotion. She didn't get it. Something sensible happened because she's been the author of failure. And also the person who got it is the China point person for what are we, for our antagonistic approach to China. So I think when she was eclipsed in the promotion, it basically meant that she was eclipsed in the State Department, and whether pushed or left, it was basically because she had reached that barrier inside. And I think the writing was on the wall, no matter how one put it one way or another.
Two more topics to raise with you. One is Pope Francis. I want to run the clip that he stated. This has nothing to do with your or my, maybe yours, because you were there more frequently than I, presence in the Vatican last week. This was actually taped before we were there, but it's very interesting. It's in Italian. I'll read the subtitles, and I'd like your thoughts on it.
Credo che è più forte
I think it's the stronger
quello
position.
che vede
To
la
look at the
situazione,
situation,
pensa al popolo
think
e ha il
about the
coraggio
people and have the
di la bandiera
courage
bianca
to raise the white
e
flag
negoziare.
and negotiate. He's speaking, of course, about Ukraine. President Zelensky and company went over the top in their criticism of him. I think this may be the first time he's weighed in publicly with a profound and constructive suggestion. He says, I'm praying for the people. That's one thing. But now he's saying, hey, guys, you're going to lose. Do the right thing. Stop the killing now. That's the way I read it.
Bless him. And he is our greatest leader of peace in the world. And he knows that the current course is just a course of destruction first and foremost of Ukraine itself, of the lost lives, hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians dead. Now, men and women being literally abducted off the streets and sent to the front lines. We watch the videos by the day. It's horrific. And what Pope Francis is saying is talk, negotiate. And I know that this is his fundamental position. It's his message in his most recent encyclical, Fratelli Tutti, which is you cannot solve these problems by war. You need to solve them by talking. And this is his genius, and this is his message, and it's extremely powerful and extremely brave, which he is, because I know the politics around the Vatican and all the diplomatic statements that will be made. How do you say this? How do you say that? Well, the way he says it is that he is the world's leading moral authority for peace. And that's how he says it.
I wish he would talk about Gaza as directly as he spoke about Ukraine. I know we haven't spoken about Gaza, but there is a clip from Andrea Mitchell at NBC. Andrea, full disclosure, has been a friend of mine for a long time, questioning Secretary Blinken. It's long. It's about a minute and a half, but it is worth watching her. She summarizes the catastrophic dilemma that the Biden administration has put itself in. And you tell me, Jeff, Professor Sachs, excuse me, if you think that this is really a legitimate answer from the secretary. Cut number 15, Chris.
The U.S. is weaponizing the war. We are the leading supplier of weapons to Israel. At the same time, you are leading an international rescue effort to get this aid in, despite the obstacles from members of the cabinet in Israel, which have delayed the opening of more land access and still are. And as you point out, these sea routes are slow. They're slower than they should be, even because not all the ports are open. And they're not a substitute for the hundreds of trucks that could get in by land. So can you explain to the American people this incompatible policy? These policies are in conflict.
These two objectives are not in conflict. The question is whether Israel, on the one hand, is and can effectively deal with its security needs and defending the country, while at the same time maximizing every possible effort to ensure that civilians are not harmed and that assistance gets to those who need it. And as I've said for some time, we see a gap between the intent and the result that we're determined every single day to close. With regard to Rafah, the President's been very clear about this repeatedly. what we've said to Israel is this: given the large number of civilians that are now in Rafah, many of them displaced from other parts of Gaza, about 1.4 million, we need to see a plan that will get civilians out of harm's way if there's to be a military operation in Rafah, and not only gets them out of harm's way, but also ensures that they have what they need, that they have shelter, that they have food, that they have medicine. We have not yet seen such a plan.
In a courtroom, I would expect a lawyer for Andrea Mitchell to say, "Judge, strike the answer as non-responsive to the question."
Well, it's pathetic. It is certainly the weakest administration imaginable. Of course, the United States could stop this mass killing and ensure that hundreds of thousands of people on the brink of starvation get food. Biden could do that with the snap of a finger because Israel can't proceed a single day without the U.S. munitions. What happens is we have that plaintive look of Blinken says, oh, they're not doing what we want. And then Netanyahu says, we're going to do what we want to do, and reminds President Biden, who runs the U.S. government, you or I? And the answer is, I do. That's what Netanyahu says. Our president is so weak that he says, okay, but could you be nicer? This is what's happening right now. It's absolutely stunning to watch. A Secretary of State wringing his hands week after week, going on missions to the Middle East, saying Israel should take more care. And then, remarkably, in that statement, he says, if they launched a military operation in Rafah. Now, Rafah's the place where all of the Gaza population has been pushed because that was going to be the safe place. Now they're going to launch a military operation. And he didn't say, don't do it. He said, well, if they do it, you have to take care. You know, I wonder, we're in a mix of course, an Israel lobby that has dominated American politics disastrously for years, the most extremist government of Israel in its history, unconscionably extremist and violent, and a president that maybe physically, I mean in mental capacity and state right now, is not capable of exercising the functions of foreign policy leader. Because if you had a regular president, the president would say to Mr. Netanyahu, I'm the president of the United States.
Right.
And you stop.
Who runs American foreign policy? Is it Tony Blinken or Joe Biden?
Or maybe neither. Maybe it's Bill Burns. Maybe it's it depends on the particular issue. Jake Sullivan. We don't know because it's not coherent. The excuses, the mumbling, the inconsequentiality of all of it, the fact that there's no diplomacy between the U.S. and Russia after more than 2 disastrous years of this open warfare. We don't know the answer to this question. But just as we've been talking, so much is secret in the U.S., or, of course, secret, subject to leaks, subject to propaganda, misinterpretation, whatever. We don't know the answer of how any of these decisions actually gets made right now. But what we can see is unbelievable drift. This is, I think, the dominant fact in these 2 wars and in the tensions with China. We have dangerous, dangerous drift. No leadership, but drift.
Professor Sachs, thank you very much. A very, very scintillating, eye-opening conversation, deeply and profoundly appreciated. I know you're off on another one of your trips, but wherever you are, we'll catch up with you.
We'll do it next week.
We'll catch up with you next week. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you so much.
Sonia, all the best. Thank you.
Thank you.
Of course. Coming up later today, bear with me just a minute. Professor John Mearsheimer at 3 o'clock Eastern, and at 4 o'clock Eastern, the inimitable, how I missed him, Max Blumenthal. Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.